So welcome back, Christian Wild.
Hi.
I think that today we would like to start with your paper again, Privacy by Blockchain Design, that you've been publishing, that you have published in 2018 with Michael Colline. And I think you wanted to dive deeper into the methodology that you've been using in the paper with your colleague.
Yes, correctly. So basically the core methodology that we used in the paper in a couple of sentences is what you need at first, of course, is a legal expert and in this case a computer scientist, since we're trying to translate legal requirements into technical requirements. But this should theoretically work with other domains as well. So maybe we can talk about different examples and how to extend this methodology later. But for now, I want to stick more with the thing that we've been doing. So you definitely need the experts in the field that you want to cover. What you also need to set at first is a scope. So in the paper, we set the scope of the consent of a data subject, since this was relatively clear in the legal sciences how this is to interpret. And then the lawyer can basically do his work and figure out what are the paragraphs and the relevant sections of the law that we need to consider in order to do this work. Once this has been wrapped up, then all those requirements have been identified. The two can basically sit together and have to do a lot of work on terminology, that they actually have the same concept behind every word that they use. This is usually not the case when you work interdisciplinary. So then the real work starts to carve out an architecture in a technical sense, or whatever tools you have in other sciences, to model out a good solution, a process, or a good approach to predefine a solution on a meta level that solves all the problems in a way that it is required by the law. So this methodology, when you look at it from the meta level, it's quite fuzzy, and I think it needs to stay this fuzzy, because only when those experts come together in an interdisciplinary team can do this work of translating the legal requirements into whatever specifications you come out with.
Right. So I guess after that, I mean, once you've applied this methodology, one aspect that you definitely dived deeper in your paper as well, or you mentioned, is the role of standardization and certification.
Yep. So we also laid out one core principle in the paper, and since we dealt with the General Data Protection Regulation, in Article 42 and 45, certification is mentioned as one specific tool that we can use to ensure and also do it in a very clear way how we can check if the requirements of the law are really honored and complied with in a concrete technical solution. And so after we wrote the paper and did this work of translating the requirements from legal to technical language, we wanted to do this on a broader scope and thought, hey, it would be actually very cool to do this for everything in the General Data Protection Regulation that concerns blockchain technology. So we talked to the dean, got funded for a project where we...
Wait a minute. The dean is The Deutsche Institut für Normung.
Yeah, the German Institute of Standardization.
So the German
Thanks.
Institute for Standardization.
Yeah, so we handed in a proposal that we basically wanted to follow up on this approach of the methodology that we developed and wanted to do this for blockchain in a broader scope. They were pretty thrilled about the idea, and we were allowed to go through with it. And so we tried to invite a lot of lawyers and techies. Also tried to get the big tech companies who are working with blockchain at the table, and also looked a bit further. So we also wanted to have somebody from the Verbraucherschutz.
I guess it's the protection of the user or consumer protection.
Yeah, so consumer rights, consumer protection. We wanted to have one of those in the team. And yeah, so I think in general, when you follow up in this, it's always good to have a very broad group of experts from very different fields to make it as interdisciplinary. Yes,
and possibly to try to cover as many aspects that you can from the entire use of the technology, we'll say.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So we basically tried to do the same thing we did in the paper, just in a broader scope with more manpower and more experts.
So the DIN SPEC is the DIN SPEC 4997.
Yes.
And it's also privacy by blockchain design.
Mm-hmm.
And the DIN SPEC was also, it was a good format, wasn't it? Because normally standards have this kind of downside to them, that they're quite slow. It can take a few years until a standard is published normally, which is quite a slow rhythm compared to technology and its quickly evolving nature.
Mm-hmm.
So these DIN specs, they only take about 8 or 9 months, something like that.
It's said they can be done in half a year. If something is really urgent and you push it through, I think half a year is what you need to get through with the DIN spec, yeah.
And which is great, because in that case you kind of recognize that there was a gap and that a lot of projects in the blockchain sphere were paused or slowed down because of the legal uncertainty, and you figured we may as well just try and do quick and good work with a multidisciplinary team to kind of set up a basis so that projects can
that was the goal, yes. So basically what we then did, we followed up on this methodology, and first we needed a good, thorough legal analysis of the general data protection law. So we had great lawyers working then all together, looking at the GDPR and basically talking a lot about what the GDPR is actually saying in regard to blockchain technology, because this is up to this point still quite fuzzy, because as we mentioned in the last article, the GDPR was probably written with decentralized technology not in mind. And then you really need to also from the legal work how you interpret the laws, because it is theoretically possible, like the legal sciences give you the tools to interpret laws, even if they are written quite vaguely, because you can go back as far as asking what's actually the sense behind this, what do they want to achieve, how do they want to help the users, the data subjects. And so we had a great team in doing that. We had we came out with about, I think, around 20 to 25 pages of a thorough analysis of the relevant GDPR articles and what this means for blockchain. And then basically from there we worked our way down, and the outcome that we had in the next step is basically we showed up all the existing tools that you have, like for risk analysis, a data protection impact assessment, and other interesting tools out there, and tried to adapt them, if they even need adaptation, to blockchain technology, and try to point to things that you should be specifically aware of when you're using this tool with blockchain technology. And when you then have this analysis of your system done, and you know the legal requirements, there we tried to do a mapping to basically, okay, let's say you have identified weaknesses in your system, in a sense of the GDPR, then you can do a mapping to concrete technical measures that you can use to mitigate the risk that happens through processing, or to improve the protection of the interests of natural persons whose data is at stake and in processing. And this mapping is, I think, one of the core, like it's a very important tool, even though it seems quite simple. A lot of work, knowledge, and thinking about those topics went into this, and it gives the reader of this DIN spec really a good roadmap, where you say, okay, I know my problems, and there are those things that I can use to mitigate this problem. And then if you have a lawyer and a computer scientist working together in your company, you can already plug those together, and then you just need to do the work and bringing the legal sphere and the technical sphere in your team closer together, that they can actually do the work. So they probably need to go through the processes, but I think the DIN spec is a good next step to go in that direction.
Yeah, exactly. So it's actually, the intent of this DIN spec was to be quite practical, to be a little bit like a roadmap, and useful for both worlds. So it's probably not extremely deep from a legal perspective, because there's a law. So if you're a legal expert, you should know about the law. But it at least gives you a sense.
I wouldn't even underestimate the work that has been done there, because, like, even amongst the lawyers, which I guess are already, like, they are quite educated and knowledgeable in the field of data protection, and had at least, some had a bit more knowledge about blockchain, other a bit less, but even just the lawyers under themselves did a lot of talking and came to a lot of conclusions that were quite eye-opening and intense for almost all participants of the DIN spec. So I wouldn't underestimate the value that we also created from a legal perspective in this document.
So do you have one particular aspect in mind?
One thing, for example, that we talked a lot about, and I think we made some good arguments, is the correlation between encrypted data, or encryption or hashing at a specific, and how this can correlate with deletion in a legal sense.
Yep. Yeah, and about this DIN spec, we are not going to now talk too long about it, because it is going to be published soon, and it's in English, and it will be available for free on the website of the DIN. So we hope to elaborate more on that, but at the moment, I think we already kind of covered a lot about the DIN spec. Yeah, no, there is one last point actually in the DIN spec that you may have wanted to mention as well.
Exactly.
About the recommended privacy by design architecture.
Yes, so I have been thinking quite a lot in the last couple of years about the not just the problems that exist between blockchain and data protection law, but actually I came to the problems by thinking more about the potential that blockchain can offer us in order to increase data protection and also potentially revolutionize the way we process data, we look at data, and the way we handle data in the internet. And in the DIN SPEC, together with the other consortium members, we worked on a reference architecture that really gives you a new approach and a new view of how you could process data also in a corporate environment. And I think we did not only achieve a higher level of protection and transparency for the data subject, so I think also a higher level of legal security for companies if they go with this approach.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So I guess it doesn't make real sense to go further into detail right now, right here, without showing you the architecture and showing you why these advantages for every participating party occurs. But I would say it is very true, and of course you can always contact us once you look at the DIN spec and want to find out more about this or have a particular interest in implementing this in your company.
Exactly. I think one aspect that maybe we've not been mentioning yet enough is maybe the like advantages and potential for standardization in the area and certification. I mean,
yes, let's draw back to what we missed
picture,
to emphasize the bigger picture.
Yeah.
So what I learned through my journey when I entered the whole ecosystem of standardization is that what standardization has become and is today is not in alignment with the picture that I had of standardization before I got to know it better, because it's a very open process. Everybody can participate, and there are a lot of good arguments that I would recommend to not only bigger companies, but also to startups and little companies or even researchers to expose themselves to a standardization process in the field that they are working anyway. One is obviously the network that you get through standardization. You get to know a lot of knowledgeable people who are very open-minded, very eager to share their knowledge and work on common solutions. You are exposed to a tremendous and enormous amount of knowledge also from other disciplines. So you widen your perspective that much that basically the input you get back and can reintegrate in your company, may it be through ideas, new learnings, new ways that you can develop your business into. There is a very big potential there. On the other, additionally, you can also participate in regulation actively, because what's usually happens is laws aren't just made by people who know or who think they have figured it all out. Usually the policymakers are actively looking for people who are actively participating in those standardization processes and trying to find good solutions that make everybody happy. And that is what standardization basically is. Standardization is usually the precursor for a regulation, because in a lot of laws the policymakers just say, hey, we have those standards on a German, European or international level, and we're just gonna make those standards obligatory because they specify the legal ideas that we have in a technical manner so that it's more understandable for the people who are actually building the products and systems that people are going to use later on. Also, additionally, what startups might be scared away is that they have to invest time and resources into standardization. But additionally to the advantages that I already mentioned, there are a lot of there is a lot of public funding for smaller companies and startup to get into standardization, to take a product or a solution that they have and make a standard about it. This doesn't mean that they have to expose all their business secrets, because once you look at it, patenting your business secret, if it's worth patenting, and then combining it with a standardization basically gives you the advantage of protecting your intellectual property, but still through the standardization you can open up new markets for yourself, because collaboration partners, consumers, or even competitors can now, even if they might have a different approach, you can standardize your solutions in a way that all the other market participants can basically choose between both of your solutions, and you don't force them to choose either one of the competitors, but actually can also design a competitive market in a more collaborative way, where, in my opinion, everybody wins in the end. So I can only strongly urge everybody who has a very negative picture of standardization and regulation to question this picture and get out there and basically learn more about this, because if you have such a negative picture, you've probably been fed the wrong information or just haven't looked at the right places, and you're missing out on a lot of opportunities, in my opinion.
Definitely, and most probably this process of standardization is also something that can, especially for startups, maybe help them out, clear a lot of problems out of the way that they may not have thought about without being confronted to a horde of other market participants, like consumer
Yes.
Consumer rights activists or organizations or
spending a
legal...
horrendous amount on consulting.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that it's great to focus on business and technology, which is often the case for tech startups. But if you do all this and then at the end you realize that you are not compliant with data protection laws, this can be a huge issue. You've done everything for nothing, basically. So yeah.
Yep.
So.
And I mean, in the end, every product is, when you want to cut it down to the one most single component, it's about people. It's always about people. And just business and tech is not going to get you there. It's definitely a good foundation, but to be really successful, you also need to do the rest of the journey, and people includes people you work with, the consumers, and all the other things you haven't thought about yet. And standardization gives you the forum to do that. I'm not saying even that standardization is the only way, but merely the methodology and the process that is used in standardization is something that a lot of industries can still learn a lot. And I think especially the tech industry is one of them, because they, even though we think we are very open-minded, we are still kind of caught in our own bubble where we can only see that far. And when you get out there and you wanna look outwards, you will find a lot of more interesting things.
Right. I think that's a really good way to end this second episode or article.
Yes, so the DIN spec 4997 is going to release in February or March
Of 2020
of this year. Yes.
of this year.
And I can only urge you, if you have anything to do with blockchain, you are probably processing personal data, even if you think you don't. So look into it, make sure you know what you're doing, and don't dismiss this too easily, because otherwise it might backfire on you at a later stage and will only be more expensive than when you've thought about it in the last day. And if you like our series so far, we can also encourage you to go to our website privacybyblockchaindesign.com and sign up for the newsletter. We are going to inform you whenever we think there is something interesting happening, or if some new projects pop up, or if we have something worth mentioning. We're gonna send you like an informative newsletter of what we think is worthy of a mention.
Yeah, that's perfect. So thanks a lot for watching.